They always called her the mistake, the one who should have never been born. When her sisters twirled in silk dresses and smiled for suitors, Clara sat quietly by the window, mending torn hems and listening to their laughter that felt like knives in her chest. "Who'd want that face?" her mother once whispered to an aunt, thinking Clara couldn't hear. But she did, she always did, and though she never answered, she carried those words like stones in her heart. It was the spring of 1887 when their small Kansas town buzzed with the talk of a rich Apache rancher seeking a wife. He'd sent word that he'd take one from the settlement, someone willing to live on his sprawling ranch deep in New Mexico territory. No one had ever seen him, only heard tales. Tall, half Apache, half Spanish, a man who'd built his fortune with his bare hands and guarded it with the fierceness of a wolf. The townsfolk whispered he was savage, untamed, maybe even cursed. But gold was gold, and the thought of marrying wealth made the women of the town forget their fears. Clara's father, bitter and drowning in debt, saw an opportunity. "We'll send one of the girls," he said one night at supper, his eyes hard and mean. "The rancher will pay a dowry, and maybe we can breathe easy for once." Her mother scoffed. "The twins are too fine for that wild man. We can't risk them being taken by some brute in the desert." Then, her lips curved into a cruel smile. But Clara, the silence that followed burned hotter than the hearth fire. They sent her off 2 mornings later, wearing a hand-me-down dress and clutching a small wooden cross. "Try not to embarrass us," her sister hissed as they shoved her into the wagon. The driver didn't speak a word as miles of dry land stretched before them. Clara didn't cry. Not once. She'd learned long ago that tears changed nothing. After 2 days, the wagon stopped at the edge of a wide valley. Before her eyes, the land spread endlessly, a sea of golden grass rolling under the sun, with wild horses running free. And standing at the gate of a massive ranch was the man they'd all whispered about. Miguel Santiago was nothing like she'd imagined. He was broad-shouldered, his skin bronze from the sun, his dark eyes steady and sharp as a hawk's. His long black hair was tied at the nape of his neck, and though he said little, his presence spoke of quiet power. The driver muttered something about payment, and after a few coins changed hands, he turned the wagon around, leaving Clara standing there alone. Miguel studied her silently for a long moment. "Your name?" he asked finally, his voice deep, calm, unexpectedly gentle. "Clara," she whispered. He nodded. "Welcome to Santiago Ranch, Clara." The ranch wasn't what she expected either. It was alive. Men working the fields, women cooking, children laughing and chasing chickens. But what struck her most was the kindness in their eyes. They looked at her, not through her, not past her, as if she mattered. For the first time in her life, no one winced when they saw her face. That night, as the sun set behind crimson hills, she sat by the corral, watching the horses graze. Miguel approached quietly, a lantern in hand. "You're not afraid," he said. She looked up. "Should I be?" He smiled faintly. "Most who come here are. I've lived with fear all my life," she said, her voice steady. "Out here, it feels smaller." He studied her again, really studied her. "Your family sent you," he said finally. "Why?" Her fingers tightened around the cross. "Because they thought it was funny." He didn't laugh. He didn't pity her either. He simply nodded, as though he understood pain without words. Then, after a long pause, he said softly, "Sometimes the world sends us its broken things, and we find they were never broken at all." That night, Clara lay awake in her small room, the desert wind whispering against the walls. For the first time, she didn't feel unwanted. She felt seen, and though she didn't know it yet, her journey had just begun, one that would turn mockery into miracle and shame into strength. Because sometimes, the one sent away in laughter becomes the one the world learns to kneel for. Weeks passed. Clara learned quickly how to ride a horse, tend the fences, and even help heal injured calves. The sun burned her skin, the dust clung to her clothes, but her heart, it began to feel light. Every morning she woke before dawn and worked alongside the ranch hands, her laughter blending with theirs. They respected her not for beauty, but for grit. And every evening, when the world turned gold, Miguel would find her sitting by the same corral, hands rough, hair tangled, eyes bright with quiet strength. One evening, she saw him training a wild stallion. The animal fought and kicked, a storm of muscle and fire. But Miguel didn't use a whip or shout. He spoke softly, patient and steady. Hours later, the stallion bowed its head. Clara stood in awe. "How did you do that?" she asked. Miguel smiled faintly. "You don't tame what's wild," he said. "You earn its trust." Something in his words touched her deeply, because for the first time, she realized that maybe he was talking about more than horses. That night, as the desert sky stretched endless and jeweled above them, Miguel handed her a piece of bread and sat beside her by the fire. "When I was a boy," he began, "my mother was taken. My father fought to keep this land, to keep our people free. The world mocked him too, called him savage, called me half-blood, but I learned something. Other people's laughter doesn't define who you are." Clara listened silently, her eyes reflecting the flames. "Maybe that's why you understand," she said softly. Miguel nodded. "Pain recognizes pain, but courage recognizes something greater." From that night on, they grew closer. Miguel taught her to rope, to ride, and to shoot. She taught him to read the Bible her mother once ignored. Together they built something quiet but strong. The workers began to call her Dona Clara, Lady Clara, the woman who turned storms into calm. One morning, word came that her father was sick and near ruin. Clara's first instinct was to ride home. Miguel didn't stop her. "Go," he said simply. "But remember who you've become." When Clara arrived, her family barely recognized her. The girl they'd mocked had changed. Her skin was sun-kissed, her shoulders straight, her eyes unafraid. Her sisters, once proud and polished, looked small beside her. Her father, pale in his bed, stared in disbelief. "Clara," he rasped, "you look different." She smiled faintly. "No, father, I'm just not what you thought I was." Her mother burst into tears, guilt heavy in her voice. "We were cruel, Clara. Forgive us." Clara knelt beside the bed, her voice calm and steady. "I forgave you long ago." Then she placed a small pouch of silver coins on the table. "This should cover your debts. The ranch is doing well." The room fell silent. Her sister's eyes widened. "You mean the Apache rancher kept you as his servant?" One of them whispered. Clara looked at her coldly, but with pity. "No," she said softly. "He made me his equal." When she returned to Santiago Ranch, the wind carried the scent of rain. Miguel was waiting at the gate, his face unreadable. "You came back," he said quietly. She smiled. "I found what I needed." He stepped closer, his gaze never leaving hers. "And what was that?" Her heart beat fast. "Home." For a moment, neither spoke. Then Miguel reached into his coat and pulled out a small silver ring carved with the mark of the sun. "I thought I'd lost faith in promises," he said, his voice low. "Until you walked into my life like light through a storm." He took her hand. "Marry me, Clara." Tears filled her eyes. Not of sadness, but of gratitude so deep it hurt. "You're sure?" she whispered. "They called me ugly, unworthy." He silenced her gently. "They were blind. You are the most beautiful thing this land has ever given me." That evening, the ranch celebrated under lanterns and starlight. The men played guitars, the women sang old Apache songs, and the children danced around the fire. Clara stood in the center, her simple dress glowing in the firelight, her smile radiant and free. The same woman her family sent away as a joke had become the beating heart of a kingdom carved from dust and dreams. Years later, travelers passing through New Mexico spoke of the Santiago Ranch, a place of peace, prosperity, and love. They said its mistress had a face marked by the sun and eyes that could calm a wild horse. They called her the Apache Rancher's treasure. And every evening, when the wind whispered through the valley, Clara would walk with Miguel to the corral where it all began. He'd place his arm around her and say, "See, the world once mocked us both, but the desert knew better." And she'd smile, watching the sun set behind their land. Yes, she'd whisper, "It always did."